everybody, to another screencast. Mr. Belcher here. Our topic today is child labor and the formation of the early unions at basically the turn of the century. Our learning outcomes for today: you should be able to describe the different labor groups and tactics used for workers' rights. You should be able to understand why workers in the late 19th century felt the need to go out on strike. And lastly, compare and contrast the strikes in Homestead, Pennsylvania and Pullman, Illinois. These are going to be two major areas of striking, and really it's going to start to change the labor force and the workers within those areas, and also it's going to set some union advancement back a little bit as well. So first thing, just take a look at this picture right here. What does it look like? How old do these kids look to you? So just kind of think about it for a second. And are they younger than you, older than you? And just think of the type of work that they are doing to look this way. So just take a second. Now take a look at this kid. How old do you think this guy is? Look at how he's dressed. Look at what he has around his neck. To me, that looks like a whip. And on the top of his hat there, it also looks like some sort of a head lantern at this point. Very primitive headlight for him to be working in the, more than likely, a coal mine situation. Also, we have a couple more pictures. These pictures have somewhat been discredited recently as being staged and not really be depicting legitimate working conditions. You can see the bottom right there, these kids don't have any shoes on, and also the little girl standing in the center there in this textile mill doesn't have any shoes on as well. Working conditions for children at this point are very, very brutal. The child is kind of seen as an extension of the workforce or working part of the family, so parents at this point are really expecting their children to find a job and to help out with any sort of bills. And children at this point, if you're working in a steel mill, you're talking 6 to 7 days a week, 12, 14-hour days. And if you're working in a textile mill, like these children, you're looking at 6 days a week, 12 hours per day. And also, again, the conditions that these people are facing are pretty incredible. Very dark, very dingy. Children are hired to try and get into very tight spaces because they have smaller hands, and also they can get paid much less. So on average, at one point here in our history, about the 1880s, we're looking at close to 700 worker injuries per week, which is pretty incredible at this point. 700 per week. There's no workman's comp. It's really, if you got injured on the job and lost your job, there's no recourse as a worker. So labor movements itself, our first major labor union is the Knights of Labor, headed by Terence Powderly. The Knights of Labor is open to all workers and races, which is pretty different for this point in our history. The position, what they're fighting for the workers, is an 8-hour workday and equal pay for women. This is going to be a cutting-edge thing for the Knights of Labor. If you're doing equal work, you should get equal pay. And also, they're advocating the abolition of child labor to set standards for the ages of people that could be working in these factories. And their major tactic is negotiation. They're going to sit down with their business owners and negotiate. And really, the Knights of Labor don't really want to use strikes. It's a very, very last resort for them. Our next major labor group is the American Federation of Labor, also known in short as the AFL, headed by Samuel Gompers there on the left. The AFL, a little bit different than the Knights of Labor. They're skilled white male workers, and they are locally organized. And what locally organized means is that they have chapters. For example, there'd be like a Torrance chapter of an AFL, a San Pedro chapter of the AFL, a Lawndale, Inglewood, that kind of thing. Okay? Their major tactic is collective bargaining, which is also negotiations. However, what's different from the Knights of Labor? Strikes were a major tactic. If they didn't get what they wanted to go out on strike. In the 25-year period from 1890 to 1915, they were able to raise the weekly wages, and the hours that they worked went down, which is a big, significant move forward. I think it's anybody's goal to work less and to get paid as much as they possibly could. Our third major labor group, headed by Big Bill Haywood here, is known as the Industrial Workers of the World. These guys are a little bit different than the other two. The Industrial Workers of the World are also known as Wobblies. Their members are miners, loggers, dock workers, and cannery workers, hence the industrial name. They're seen as socialists, despite the fact that they elect recallable delegates to represent them and believe in the rank and file of the workers. Their main goal is to possibly overthrow the wage system in the free market. And their main idea is it's all about the people over the actual profit of the company. These big business owners that are making all the money, but they could care less about those workers that are making them that money. The strikes itself, so let's get into these. The Great Strike of 1877. What else also happens in 1877? Remember the compromise that ends Reconstruction. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad is losing money because remember those panics that were causing people to kind of look back at what is going to be most beneficial for them versus the greater group. Well, these workers have their wages cut. So what's going to happen is there's going to be a strike. And the two ways that a business owner could break a strike is to bring in the state militia or to bring in scabs or replacement workers. Well, this Great Strike of 1877 results in a 45-day strike before the workers are kind of forced out of the strike. The next major strike is a few years later, about 10 years, the Haymarket Meeting. You can see mass meeting tonight, 7:30 o'clock in the Haymarket. Attention working men. And this ultimately is going to result in violence. The Haymarket Meeting itself, these workers are striking for an 8-hour workday. They're going to be protesting and going to the Haymarket to protest police brutality that's been going on at the mill. No one really knows what happens or who does it, but there's a bomb that gets tossed into the crowd. The police open fire and ultimately results in 14 people being dead, 7 police and 7 workers. And this is considered the origin of May Day, which is observance of workers and their rights. Company towns is exactly what it sounds. It is very typical in lumber, coal, and metal mine areas. Think of like West Virginia or that kind of Appalachian area. The company town is going to control everything within that town itself. It's going to control the workforce, the housing, the markets, anything. The two major ones that we're going to talk about is Pullman, Illinois, which was based on railroads, and Homestead, Pennsylvania, which was a Carnegie steel mill. The Homestead Strike itself, there is, again, in this time period where workers' wages are being cut, the plan is to cut their wages again. The problem is there is these negotiations between the Steelworkers Union and the kind of the leader, which Carnegie had hired a guy by the name of Ford Frick to lead these negotiations. Carnegie's kind of seen as this likable guy. Frick is a very hard-nosed businessman. So when the workers go out on strike, Ford Frick basically locks them out of the factory. So he plans to hire replacement workers or scabs. The negotiations are going to last so long that many workers are going to say, forget this, I'm just going to go back and work because I need the money. Ultimately leading to this huge battle between what is going to be a hired militia in the Pinkertons and these steelworkers who are very upset. And it's going to last so long that the Steelworkers Union itself almost goes bankrupt, who was representing these workers. And it's really going to set them back almost 45 years. It's not going to be until close to kind of the New Deal era in the 1930s where we're going to see a revival in the Steelworkers Union. Now the Pullman Strike, again, very similar company town. Pullman, Illinois is all about railroads. And what is going to happen here, similar to Homestead, like I said, the demand for rail cars is going to be down at close to the turn of the century. And the Pullman company is looking to cut their costs. And what that's ultimately going to result in is the wages for their workers. So the Pullman company is going to lay off almost a little over 50% of their workers actually and cut their wages. So after these first rounds of layoffs, the workers are thinking, well, I won't get a wage cut. However, that comes as well. So they're laying off workers and cutting wages, but they're not lowering the housing costs. So the Pullman company, who is owning all of the homes in the area that these workers are renting, are still demanding the same price. And ultimately, these workers are taking home less than $6 per week. So it's really not enough to live on. And again, resulting in a strike, which the Pullman company is going to bring in U.S. Marshals to break that strike. What it's going to come down to is this Pullman strike is going to be so famous or get so much notoriety that this town itself is going to be seen as un-American, that the Pullman company shouldn't have been treating their workers this way. And ultimately what's going to happen is this Pullman town is going to be kind of annexed back into the greater Chicago area there in Illinois. As a result of this, the railroad industry is going to blacklist those workers that went on strike. So they're not going to be able to find another job in the railroad industry. So let's recap really quickly. You should be able to describe the different labor groups and the tactics, whether that's negotiations, going out on strike, if they use that as a last resort or whatever. Second thing, understand why workers in the late 19th century felt the need to go out on strike, getting laid off and getting their wages cut. And then lastly, compare and contrast the strikes in Homestead, Pennsylvania and Pullman, Illinois. They're very similar in the fact of cutting wages and what's going to happen with their workers and how it gets how those strikes get broken. So if you have any questions, shoot me an email, let me know, find me in class, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.